Hello, I'm Kurt Lidke, board chair of Klamath Film, and you just watched You'll Have Revenge, a hilarious comedy about the holidays and a sentient tree that exacts its revenge for mistreatment. With us is the director, David DeRienzo. David, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So, in the echelon of films about sentient objects that turn evil, this is one of them.
That's a true statement. Yes.
This is
That
a film.
this is one of the movies of all time.
Yes, this is a film that exists. Immediately, it made me think of things like Christine, The Car, Rubber is one of my personal favorites in this genre. You can even throw like maybe some of the Chucky film, like
Sure.
the
Yeah,
Child's
definitely
Play
some
films
child's
in
play
this.
in there, yeah.
So, where did your idea of wanting to embark on this fun little subgenre of horror, but make it a comedy, come from?
I have always loved the holidays, and I feel like there are some films that get made about other holidays besides Halloween. Obviously, Halloween is kind of the nucleus of where you get like holiday themed horror slash comedy films. But I feel like Christmas is sometimes neglected because I feel like it's sacrosanct. You should only have like really good feelings on Christmas. So I wanted to tackle a holiday that doesn't have a whole lot of horror around it apart from like the occasional like Krampus or something like that. It was kind of inspired by movies that I grew up watching, like Gremlins, which of course is like one of my favorite Christmas movies and stuff like that. So, yeah.
And this was a project. I know you're very involved in Eugene in the local film community behind the scenes, but you hadn't necessarily been doing your own projects for a while. So, what was the impetus to kind of get back behind the camera for something that you have written and directed, as opposed to being such a supporter uh, of the Eugene and larger scope film community in Oregon, and with all of those supplemental needs that are so important?
Yeah, so it's kind of a funny story that I come from a somewhat of a larger industry than the one that's in Eugene. The one in Eugene, it's and I say this affectionately, is kind of amateur, right? It's filmmakers that didn't grow up subscribing to a particular school, literally and figuratively, of filmmaking. It's kind of a group of people that are just so passionate about it that they figured things out on their own. Like that's literally what amateur means, right? It doesn't mean that you suck at it. It just means you do it out of the love of the art and not necessarily because it's your job. I grew up in Orlando, which is not a huge market, but it's a bigger market than Eugene. And I got to work on some really cool stuff, driving down to Miami every day to work on things like Dexter and Burn Notice as a PA back when those shows were contemporary. And when I came out to Eugene and started talking to the filmmakers and I started hanging out on people's sets, um, I gave folks feedback about like, your production might run smoother if you do X, Y, and Z, right? You should make a production book, you should have a shot list. I have experience with all these things, so I kind of showed folks the templates to use for those kinds of things, and people like started using them more in the Eugene area. But as while people like appreciated my feedback, they were like, David, you keep giving filmmakers in Eugene feedback, but you're not making any movies. So it's kind of a challenge for me to make a movie. And there just happened to be a holiday themed showcase coming up. And, one of my friends and fellow filmmakers, Mike Schwab, said, David, you should make a movie. You should break your streak of not having made a movie in a while and put your money where your mouth is and actually do something yourself rather than like criticize other people's work. So I'm like, you know what? Valid point. I have a week to make this thing and edit it and cut it. So it was a really fun, somewhat stressful experience, but it got me back into filmmaking, and that's really cool.
And it's a very fun, it's a very silly film, and it breaks one of the cardinal rules of filmmaking, which you and I have talked about before. Never work with animals or kids is one of the primary rules. However, I think that the kids have the single best lines in this film, and their delivery of it is fantastic in terms of the social commentary on capitalism, consumerism surrounding the holiday is just so perfect for a film that already is very tongue-in-cheek and self-aware of what it is. So kudos for the writing on that perspective, but also having seen so many films where the kids destroy an otherwise good project, how did you get a decent, albeit short, but still a decent performance out of your child actors?
Yeah, never worked with kids or animals. If you consider a tree an animal, I kind of have both of those things because the tree very much functioned as an animal while we were filming because it was very difficult to deal with. But um, I grew up loving like my one of my favorite genres. One of the reasons I moved to Oregon in the first place is because I'm a Goonie and I've always been a Goonie and I've always dreamed of living in Oregon because the Goonies was such a big part of my life. So that kind of thread of childhood adventure has always been a huge part of the kinds of films that I've wanted to make. And if you look at the films I've made in the past, they've all featured, kids to some degree, if not as the lead role, because I love the Goonies. I love Stand By Me, even some of like lesser known childhood focused movies back in the day, like Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead and things like that. And one thing that I appreciated about those movies growing up before I feel like things kind of got more globalized in the 90s and early 2000s was there was a respect for the thought that like kids are smarter than you think they are or give them credit for. And if you look at like the dialogue in the Goonies and things like that, those kids are like cussing like pretty frequently, and they're pretty like they're all smart asses, right? And I love that because that's how me and my friends were when I was a kid. And then watching kind of more like Disneyified stuff, not to knock on Disney or anything like that. I felt like there was like this bubble put around a lot of like kids entertainment where the kids didn't get to be cool, right? We kind of made them strictly innocent and things like that. And I'm like, well, that's not fun. So one of my greatest joys as a filmmaker is taking child actors and giving them an opportunity to be bad in a space where there's no consequences for it, right? And they love to have that opportunity. And it's when you give kids that opportunity, they run with it. Like, hey, you're allowed to say this word because I wrote it, right? So you're not going to get in trouble with your parents. You're allowed to do this horrible thing, like throw a helpless Christmas tree, not really helpless Christmas tree, but throw this sentient Christmas tree into a wood chipper, right? So that makes the kids a lot easier to work with as artists because when you give somebody a tool, you take away like the distractions, right? It's almost like a fidget spinner or something like that, where I've given them an outlet to get that dopamine and that energy out. And I did it in a way that allows them to also help get the movie made at the same time. So that's my recommendation for anybody that wants to work with kids is give them an opportunity to do something they can't do in real life, and they'll immediately attach themselves to like your story and the narrative you're trying to weave.
And the tree in the film is lovingly cast as the Treeminator, and uh, obviously practical effect because I mean this clearly was a project done out of love, not out of James Cameron budget,
Yeah.
and making it believable. Was that a lot of just wires and patience and cut after cut, or was there someone within the tree manipulating it? How did you make all that work?
Yeah, so the tree is played brilliantly by an actor and overall artist named David Mort. He also created the puppet hand, like the wooden looking hand, and he was also, for as much as you could puppeteer a store bought Christmas tree, um, he was also puppeteering the tree, right? So when the tree is moving, he's down there like shaking the base and things like that. And that could have been anybody, right? But I wanted it to be also the guy that was playing the voice of the tree. And I don't know why early on in writing I inserted like a couple references to the Terminator, and I think it was Taylor Morden who came up with the idea of calling it the Treeminator, and that just kind of stuck. There's three separate references to the Terminator in in the movie. So it just all kind of worked. It's one of those things where you can't force that kind of creativity. It just kind of serendipitously happened. But David Mort was amazing as the tree. I didn't know how, like, when looking at the dailies, obviously everything was ridiculous, right? Because, you look at old, like, dailies from Star Wars and you hear, David Prowse playing Darth Vader on set, and it's not James Earl Jones' voice, and it sounds ridiculous because it's just this guy that barely speaks English, and he's trying to say these really dramatic lines through the mask. But then, you see David Mort actually saying the lines when we did the ADR recording, and that really sells everything. Otherwise, it's literally just the top of a tree. There's no face. There's nothing to anthropomorphize it. It's ridiculous, but it works because of David's performance in post just as much as him shaking the tree and doing all these little things to give the tree a personality on set.
And you mentioned a longtime friend of the festival, Taylor Morton, also a Eugene-based filmmaker who has been in our festival every year, I think, since 2019 or 2018, and has a film this year. A Payphone is also in our festival this year. But him coming up with that name also seems very on brand for Taylor. For anyone who has met him, he may even out nerd me, which is a great achievement to be able to do. And so yeah, that sounds very on brand for Taylor, I will just say.
Yeah, Taylor's great. He edited the film, and that wasn't even part of the plan going forward. I was going to edit it myself because I didn't want to ask somebody, "Hey, I just shot this over the weekend. I need a final cut due by Saturday to Ed Scheisel so that he can screen it at the art house." I wouldn't ask anybody to do that, right? Not unless I could pay them like thousands of dollars to do it. And I gave Taylor a cut just so that he could edit, like, just give me feedback on the edit. And he's like, "Just give it to me, man. I'll cut it." So it's just one of those examples of like how beautiful this Eugene filmmaking community is. Is like everybody's helping each other out, and I consider Taylor not to necessarily be a peer. I feel like he's on a totally another level, right? He's done some really amazing stuff. He's on streaming services. He's a big deal. But the fact that he came in and is like, "Look, just give me your footage. I'll make a cut," and that's the final cut that will be screened at the film festival. Um, that's just amazing, and one of the reasons why I love this community.
So when making a film like this, and not necessarily this one specifically, but just speaking in general terms, when there's something that is very slapstick or very tongue-in-cheek, very self-aware, I've always felt like it works really well when it's played straight. If the actors are in on the joke, it doesn't necessarily work. But you look at some of the ultimate classics like Leslie Nielsen in the Naked Gun movies, just as an example. He's playing it like Dragnet. And that's what makes it absolutely hilarious is that these totally ridiculous scenarios, but he's like deadpanning it throughout, and that's what makes it funny. If he's smiling with the audience, like some of the movies tended to do, epic movie and disaster movie and all those cheapo films that came out in the early to mid 2000s. And I think that's why those films didn't work, was that like they were just like winking at the camera, and it's like
Yeah.
that's not what makes great slapstick great. But on the back end of that is when you're making something that is so ludicrous, so ridiculous, and so stupid, and I say that in the most loving way, how do both the actors and those behind the camera not ruin takes over the other utter stupidity? Like, how many times did you have to go again because someone laughed in the background? I guess is what I'm getting at.
That that didn't happen as often as I thought it would. Partly because we had a really short timeline, and when you've been on set for 12 hours, the most hilarious things start to cease to be funny until there's actually probably it's a bell curve, right? Because when you start getting delirious at maybe like hour 16
Right.
or something like that, everything starts to get funny again. So it was a really professional crew. The kids were amazing, and they kept it together and just really understood their lines. We The biggest thing that we experienced was that we had to like think, how is this going to play to the audience, right? Because again, it's a Christmas tree. Did we get the right delivery? Did we get the right reaction to things? One of the things that I love most about filmmaking as a medium, and really like any kind of storytelling, is you kind of mentioning like people are in on the joke or they're not in on the joke. Every film establishes like the rules of the world early on, right? But those rules don't mean anything if all the characters in that universe know the rules too. But it's good to have like one character that maybe knows what the rules are, so that way when the rules change, everybody else gets to react to that. So like an example is nobody in this story reacting to this sentient murdering Christmas tree knows like what, like how do you kill the tree, right? It's not a wolf man, like we don't have a silver bullet, we don't have, it's not a
Right.
vampire, so we don't have like a wooden stake or anything like that. A wooden stake would probably just add to the tree, right? So when there's a scene where Patrick, the dad, thinks he kills the tree, right, because he hacks it up but doesn't understand the rules that, well, as long as any part of the tree is still alive, especially the part that was like the top where the star was mounted, the tree is still alive. So you have that kind of defiance of expectations, and like, showing you what the rules are, and that kind of revolution of what the rules are is something that we were trying to think of as we were on set and say, well, is that consistent? Which is ridiculous when you think about, like, again, this guy is shaking this tree from around the corner and saying, "Does this look right?" And we're asking the question, "Is this logically consistent with what we've seen the tree do before?" So there's like more of those moments than us like cracking up laughing, or we're trying to see like, what are the rules of this world? What's the rules of the tree? Are we still threading everything together and making sense? So that in of itself I thought was really funny, is that everybody took it so seriously.
Do you have a favorite aspect of this film, either in the course of production, post-production, writing, or some of the reaction that you've gotten since it came out?
So it screened at a holiday showcase, and it screened right at the end of the showcase, which kind of made me nervous because everything, that's kind of the capstone of the whole show. And again, this is my first film in several years. Down the road, my last film was a while ago. I've worked on a lot of stuff since then, but that was the last film that I directed, and that was before I even moved out to Oregon. And so, getting back in the saddle, I was very tense and worried. Like, man, this is like my first film back. This is my first film in a new community, right? I only get one opportunity to make a first impression. So there was like a lot riding on this ridiculous murdering Christmas tree movie, and we there's kind of like this air of not knowing what this movie's about in like the first minute or so. But the moment that the tree popped up into frame and you hear David's voice say, bleep bleep. I don't even know if I'm allowed to cuss on this interview, but I'm not going to say it. But the moment he pops up
Go ahead.
and says, the MF word, and people in the audience started laughing, I was like, all right, I still got it. So that was a really great moment in showcasing it, and that was the first time it showed. I did another small screening for some family and members of the cast that couldn't make it to that screening because it was sold out. Apart from that, this is the premiere of You'll Have Revenge. So this is the first festival that it's going to. So I'm really excited about that, and excited to see a whole new set of reactions and a larger venue.
Is there any aspect of this film we haven't talked about yet that you want to make sure it's mentioned?
I do want to talk about what it takes to make films like this, especially when you're on a really, I wouldn't even call it a shoestring budget, right? It's a bootstrap budget. You have to like lift yourself up in defiance of physics in order to make a film like this. The people that allowed us to shoot at their homes, at their businesses, imposing on them, because no matter how conscientious you try to be when you're making a film, you're constantly imposing on businesses, people,
You're still getting in their way
the
where they have to hang
city,
around after hours and not
right?
lock up. And
So I really want to thank the folks that contributed to that. Catherine Solar Beer, who let us stay at her house and take over her house with a bunch of junk for 2 whole days, and 295 tactical, which let us shoot in a building where people get their concealed carry licenses and things like that. They let us shoot around all these guns for this ridiculous scene. The outpouring of support from the community. I didn't think I could get this film made when I started making it, given the parameters that I had, the timeline that I had. So, for the folks that might be watching this and thinking about all the work that maybe the director did or the people that were trying to do the tree effects did to make it happen, think about, if you ever have the opportunity to help a group of filmmakers by giving them a location, giving them food, anything like that, that's really what gets films made. That's what powers this industry, especially in a very small market like the ones that we have in Oregon. So that would be my biggest advice to any of the filmmakers, and my biggest advice to any of the folks that aren't filmmakers and want to know how they can be part of the storytelling medium. Is it's always hard making a film. If there's a way that you can help, do it. And if a filmmaker asks you for help, their success or failure probably hinges on that request for help. So yeah.
Wonderful. Well, You'll Have Revenge is screening at the 12th Annual Klamath Independent Film Festival on Sunday, September 29th in our comedy block starting at 11 a.m. at the Ross Raglan Theater. And people can catch it here on eventive.org for 2 weeks around the festival. So you can go back, rewatch, and relive that amazing, epic commentary on capitalism intertwined with the Christmas holiday as presented by a couple of kids. David, thank you so much for this film. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you in Klamath Falls.
Yeah. Thanks for the amazing platform.